Chapter 16 A Difficult Night. Joe was still thinking about returning home. He was feeling worse and worse the longer he was away from home. Huckleberry felt sad as well. Tom realized this and was eager to tell them something that would help them to feel better. However, he wanted to wait for the right moment. He tried to get them to think about something else, so he reminded them they were now pirates.
I believe other pirates once lived on this island. If that's true, then they probably left some treasure hidden somewhere near here. Why don't we look for it? We could all become rich.
Huck and Joe just sat there looking sad. Then Joe said,
I just feel too terrible. I'm ready to go back home. Hey, don't talk like that, Joe. You're just not used to it yet. Let's go fishing. You'll soon forget about it. I don't really want to fish, Tom. I just want to go home. But home is boring, Joe. I don't care anymore. I miss my mother. You're such a child, Joe. Go home then. We don't need you. There's nothing wrong with missing your mother. You just don't know what it's like because you've never had a mother. Huck, you've had a mother before, and you don't seem to miss her much, right?
Huck just looked at the ground. Joe started walking toward the river, and Huck suddenly said,
I kind of agree with Joe, Tom. I may not miss my family, but I miss my old life. Fine. You go, but I'm staying right here.
When Huck began to follow Joe toward the river, Tom felt a pain in his heart. He also wanted to go home, but he wasn't ready to go just yet. He had a plan, and now was the right moment to tell the boys about it.
Okay, wait a minute, boys. There's something I haven't told you.
Tom walked out to where they were standing in the river. They listened to what Tom had to say, ready to keep walking as soon as he had finished, but the more he talked, the less of a hurry they were in to go back home. They liked his plan and agreed to follow it.
Why did you wait so long to tell us about it, Tom?
Later that evening, Tom and Joe asked Huck to teach them how to smoke. So Huck took out his tobacco and paper and taught them first how to make a cigarette, how to light it, and finally, how to smoke it.
Hey, this isn't difficult. I can't believe they don't teach us this when we're younger,
shouted Tom.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that I'd feel sick, but I don't feel anything,
said Joe. Then Tom had an idea.
Listen, Huck. When we go back to the village, you and I will surprise the other kids. One day, when we're all together, I'll ask you for a cigarette, and then you'll say that you didn't bring your good tobacco. And I'll say that if it's strong tobacco, then it's good enough for me. Then you and I will smoke like we've been doing it since we were born. Those kids would really be surprised then. Good idea, Tom. I can't wait to see their faces.
They kept talking for a while, until Joe said that he'd lost his knife. Tom offered to help him find it, and they both walked off together, leaving Huck alone by the fire. After an hour had passed, Huck started to wonder what had happened to the others. He got up and found both of them sleeping under a nearby tree. Later that night, Joe woke up and felt something was strange about the weather. He shouted for the other boys to wake up. Tom and Huck felt that something was strange as well. They built a fire and sat around it, waiting to see what would happen. Then there was a bright light in the sky for only a short moment, and after it came a loud noise. It was the beginning of a storm, and soon it started to rain.
Run, everyone, before we get wet,
Tom shouted. Each boy ran and found his own shelter. It was a strong storm. The wind blew hard and the rain fell heavily. The boys tried shouting to each other, but the sound of the rain made it impossible for them to hear. The boys were frightened as the wind blew several trees on their side, and the light continued to come and go in the sky. Eventually, however, the storm started to calm, and the weather once again became quiet and peaceful. Surprisingly, the boys' fire was still burning. They were too wet to sleep, so they cooked some meat and talked around the fire until morning. After the sun rose, they lay under it to dry themselves until it became too hot. Then they rested under some trees. Lying there, they all thought eagerly about returning home. They were tired of being pirates. They still had one more day on the island, so Tom thought of another game for them to play. They pretended they were Indians. They hunted like Indians, fought like Indians, and, at the end of the day, they smoked together like real Indians. And it was nice for Tom and Joe to realize once again that they had taken another step toward being men by learning how to smoke without feeling ill. Chapter 17. The Boys Come Back from the Dead. The next day was a sad one for the village. It was the day that everyone was to meet at the church and pray for their lost boys. Everyone was so sad that they didn't even talk much to each other, and the children didn't play as they usually did. For Becky Thatcher, this was a truly terrible day. She remembered how she had treated Tom. And as she thought about this, she said to herself, "If only I could see Tom again, I'd tell him how sorry I was and how happy I would be to get engaged again." And then she cried. The day before, many children from the school gathered at the front gate to think and talk about Tom and Joe and all of the games they had played with them, and all of the times those two boys had gotten into trouble. They missed them both terribly. One boy said that he had been the last person to see them alive. The children had many questions for him. This made the boy feel very proud. The church bell rang all morning for the people to remember the boys. At 10 o'clock, everyone came to the church and sat quietly waiting for the prayer service to begin. The last people to enter the church were the families of the dead boys. As Aunt Polly, Sid, Mary, and all of the Harpers walked down the center of the 2 rows of seats, the rest of the people stood up out of respect for them. Once the 2 families were seated in front, the minister began to talk about the boys. He talked about how wonderful they were, which made many people feel guilty for having once thought of them as bad boys. Between prayers, everyone cried. Then, suddenly, at the back of the church, there was the sound of a door being opened slowly. There was total silence inside, and everyone turned to see what was happening. And soon, walking before them all, were the very boys they were there to pray for. Both Tom's and Joe's families came running to greet them with tears of joy. Huck felt a little embarrassed and tried to leave the church, but Tom caught him and said to his aunt,
"It's not very fair that Huck doesn't have anyone to greet him."
Aunt Polly smiled even more, and taking Huckleberry in her arms said, "You can think of Tom's family as your family, Huckleberry." This just made Huck even more embarrassed.
"Oh, what a wonderful day this has turned out to be. Let me hear all of you sing as loud as you can,"
shouted the minister. And so the church was filled with singing voices. Tom even sang, and loudly too. He knew that this would be a day he would always remember. Chapter 18. Tom tells about his amazing dream. So that was the plan Tom had told his two friends about on the island. They would go back to their village and secretly listen to everyone talk about them. They had left the island last night and arrived at the village a couple of hours before the prayer service began, so they found a place to sleep in the old empty building where Tom and Huck had made their agreement. For breakfast the next day, Aunt Polly and Mary cooked a lot of food in their excitement to have Tom back. They were all very talkative. "We're lucky to be able to laugh about it now, but I wish you had come and told me sooner where you were. I was crying all day, every day. Why didn't you try to make your aunt feel better sooner, Tom?" "I think that Tom just didn't think about it. He was probably having too much fun." "I'm sure he would have come if he'd thought about it," replied Mary. "Is that true, Tom? Or did you just decide it would be nice to frighten your aunt a little?" "You know Tom. He's always forgetting to think about people other than himself." "Well, I'm sure that Sid wouldn't have made me suffer like that. He would have told me where he was. I think that in the future, after I've been dead a while, you'll wish you'd been nicer to me, Tom." Tom now felt guilty and said,
"Don't say that, Auntie. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but you were in my dreams."
"Well, that doesn't exactly make me feel better."
"In my dream, you, Sid, Mary, and Joe's mother were all sitting in that room over there. You were all talking about us."
"Well, actually, we did all meet in there one night. Tell me more, Tom."
"Well, it's hard for me to remember it clearly."
"Try, Tom. Think very carefully."
"I remember that you felt a little cold and sent Sid to close the front door because you thought someone had left it open."
"That's true. Go on."
"Well, you continued talking about us, and I seem to remember you saying that I had really been a good boy before. You said that I just had a lot of energy to use up."
"This is just amazing. How can people say that it's impossible for dreams to really happen when I've just heard it with my own ears?"
Then you started crying.
"You're right again."
And when Mrs. Harper began to cry, you told her the story about what had happened with me and the cat the other day. Then you started talking about how our bodies had been found, and you said something about there being a prayer session at the church on Sunday.
"Well, I don't know what to say, Tom. You have a very special ability."
And after everyone had gone to bed and Mrs. Harper had gone home, you started praying, and I remember it felt like I had been right there in the room with you. Then you fell asleep, and I watched you there for a while, wishing I could do something to make you feel better. I had a note ready to give you. It said, "We're still alive. Don't worry. We've just become pirates." Then, just before leaving, I gave you a kiss.
"Is that true, Tom? Did you really kiss me in your dream?" Aunt Polly asked while giving Tom a big hug.
"It was just a dream, Aunt Polly,"
said Sid. "Shut your mouth, Sid. Here's a nice big apple for you, Tom. Thank you for being such a sweet boy. Now, go on to school." On his way to school, Tom could see that everyone was looking at him. Some children started to follow him, hoping they might get a chance to talk with him. Other children were jealous of Tom's popularity and they tried to pretend they hadn't seen him. Tom no longer needed Becky Thatcher as his girlfriend. He was famous now, so he could have many other girls if he wanted them. He pretended not to see Becky when he got to the school. Several times he noticed that she would come over near where he was playing to look at him, and then quickly run back to play with other boys. Tom started talking with Amy Lawrence again, hoping Becky would see this and become jealous. This worked well, because Becky became angry, but she didn't tell anyone. And no matter how badly she wanted to get away from Tom, she found that she couldn't. She ran over to one of the other girls and said, "Hey, Mary! I couldn't find you yesterday. I wanted to let you know that I am having a picnic." "Really?" "Yes. My mother said it was okay." "Can I come?" "Of course you can. All of my friends will be there." Becky then looked to see if Tom had heard her saying this, but he was still talking with Amy Lawrence. Soon, all the children started asking to be invited to the picnic. Well, almost all of them. Tom and Amy were still talking. This made Becky even angrier than before. She could feel tears coming to her eyes. She ran away now to try and hide her sadness. Later that day, Tom saw Becky sitting with Alfred Temple. They were reading a book and laughing about something. Tom suddenly no longer wanted Amy Lawrence. He had to have Becky again. Becky now pretended not to see him watching them. She was happy to see him so jealous. Tom stood there watching them, thinking of how he would beat Alfred Temple the next chance he got. He hated everything about him. His clothes, his face, his name, everything. He made 2 fists and started swinging them around, pretending he was hitting Alfred. At lunchtime, Becky sat with Alfred again, hoping Tom would see them, but he never appeared. She quickly became angry and told Alfred, who sat there surprised by this sudden change in her attitude, that she never wanted to see him again. Now Alfred realized that Becky had been using him to make Tom jealous. He decided that he had to do something to hurt Tom. He went into the classroom, picked up one of Tom's books, and tore the pages out of it. Then he put it back on Tom's desk so that it would look like Tom had destroyed it. At that same moment, Becky had been watching Alfred through the window. She decided not to tell Tom what had happened, because she wanted to see him get into trouble.